Okay, so recording is enabled and we are in session. This is going to be our topic today. Accruals concept, the introduction. Today we are going to have a Daud, you have to figure out a way, bete. Ask someone who can help you with that. I cannot help you here. You have to send your work on Google Classroom. If there is no work on Google Classroom, there is no grade on Google Classroom. I'm sorry. कोई दूसरे मीडियम पे आप बेशक मुझे भेज दें, लेकिन आपका ग्रेड वहाँ पे कैलकुलेट होना है. So it won't be possible. So, okay, so accruals concept, that is our topic today. And accruals concept basically is, it's a very big concept. And it's not, although this particular topic is all about just expenses and incomes, as you can see here, as the title says. But the accruals concept doesn't only apply to just apply to expenses and incomes, but it applies to all the accounting items, including assets and liability recognition, expenses and incomes, and even provisions. So we are going to discuss the accruals concept. आज हम बिल्कुल basic intro लेंगे. आज हम एक बहुत full length class तो नहीं होगी, लेकिन जितनी भी class time होगा, we will be able to cover the basics. So let's get started. So now we have to first understand the duality or the dual aspect nature of the expenses. अभी तक हम expenses जो expenditures के साथ deal करते आए हैं mostly, उनमें capital expenditures were easier for us to relate with because जब भी आप कोई expenditure करते हैं, आपका cash या check से payment तो हो रही होती है, तो आप उसका effect तो visibly देख सकते हैं. ठीक है, आप उसका इफेक्ट तो विजिबली देख सकते हैं. Just a second, people are keep on joining in. Okay, okay, Nurulan, bete, the thing is that your attendance is taken automatically on Zoom. So if you're not signing in with your own name, then you probably will not be marked present. So make sure कि आज की क्लास के बाद अब आप जब भी आप लॉगिन करें तो अपनी असल नाम के साथ लॉगिन करें, वरना आपकी अटेंडेंस का कोई सीन नहीं. So be careful. यूज़ योर ओरिजिनल नेम. जो भी आपकी स्कूल आईडी है उसके मुताबिक आपकी जूम आईडी होनी चाहिए, उसी के मुताबिक आपकी गूगल क्लासरूम आईडी होनी चाहिए. So anyway, so every time an amount is spent, there the effect is visible. और कल हम क्लास में जब हम binomial expansions की बात कर रहे थे, तो हमने ये भी देखा था कि हर इफेक्ट का एक certain cause होता है. So जब आप एक for example आप एक मशीन खरीदते हैं, so you buy a machine paying by check. So you see the cause and the effect both quite visibly, right? Quite visibly you see the cause and effect. कि आपका कैश एंड बैंक आप लूज़ कर रहे होंगे और आपको उसके बदले में एक मशीनरी एक्वायर कर रहे होंगे. So basically the principle of duality is all about this, that you acquire something and at the expense of acquiring that benefit you lose something else. So that is how the double entry works. But when it comes to your day-to-day revenue expenses, you can see one of the two quite visibly, but the other is not as visible as in the example of a purchase of a non-current asset. For example, let me just give you a couple of examples. There is a transaction. Every transaction has, in the case of expenses, the effect is quite visible. The effect of the expense is quite visible. However, the cause, or what we call in accounting, the substance of that effect is not very visible. It needs to be sort of thought out carefully. For example, अगर आप एक transaction देते हैं paid rent by check, तो आपको अपने एग्जिस्टिंग एसेट्स के ऊपर उसका इफेक्ट तो क्लियरली नज़र आ रहा है, क्योंकि आपने रेंट पे किया है बाय बैंक. सो आपका बैंक अकाउंट बैलेंस डिक्रीज कर जाएगा एज द screen suggests right now. So bank account balance goes down. So the effect of this transaction is quite visible. But what do you get in return of that? What do you gain in return of that? So Nurulan, आपको अपनी Zoom आईडी के अंदर अपना नाम चेंज करना होगा. अगर आप अपनी Zoom आईडी के अंदर साइन इन कर रहे हैं तो वहाँ पर आपने अपना नाम जो रखा है उसको आपको अपना नाम चेंज करके लिखना पड़ेगा. सो एनीवे फिगर इट आउट कि वो कैसे करना है. अपने जूम की सेटिंग्स में जाके आप उसमें अपना नाम चेंज कर लें. जब आप yeah, and I told you, Noor, but the problem I have mentioned you this, since the attendance is going to be taken mechanically, so I'm sorry I can't help it there, right? Okay. Now, so इसके बदले में जब आप रेंट पे करते हैं, so आपका बैंक अकाउंट का बैलेंस तो एकदम डिक्रीज कर जाएगा और वो आपको विजिबल होगा, लेकिन एट द एक्सपेंस ऑफ लूजिंग दिस bank account balance, there has to be some sort of a benefit that you have acquired in return. And that is your cause or substance. So आपके ख्याल में आप जो भी इस ट्रांजैक्शन के अंदर आपको इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट मिल रहा है, वो do you agree with this? Give me a green check that the cause or substance over here can be taken as the acquisition to acquire the accommodation facility. The economic benefit that we are getting in return of losing our bank account balance is that we are buying accommodation facility for 1 month. So I'm sorry, Abdul Wase, I cannot help it. I told you, आप लोग अपनी अपनी आईडी से साइन इन करें तो बेहतर होगा. मैं अब क्या कर सकता हूँ, हम क्लास का टाइम बहुत ज़्यादा ज़ाया कर रहे हैं इन basically these childish things. So please make sure that you sign in with your own ID and your name is going to be the same as appearing in your school records. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for me to mark you attendance later on. I don't know whose name you have signed in. How am I supposed to mark your attendance, right? Okay. So anyway, so the transaction that you see on the screen right now, do you agree that the effect is the bank account balance goes down and the cause or the substance of this transaction is that you have bought accommodation facilities from your landlord for a month? Give me a green check on the feedback window if you do, if you understand the duality behind this transaction, the dual aspect nature of this transaction. If you understand, give me a green check, everyone. Right? Jawad? जवाद, अगर आप पार्टिसिपेंट्स के टैब पे क्लिक करेंगे तो वहाँ पर आपको येस नो के ग्रीन चेक और रेड क्रॉस मिल जाएगा. इफ़ यू अंडरस्टैंड, गिव मी अ ग्रीन चेक और अ रेड क्रॉस इफ यू डोंट. ओके, मेरे ख्याल में जवाद को आवाज़ नहीं आ रही. Anyway, so now I'm going to give you another example over here. Another common example of a transaction related to an expense is paid salaries by cash. So again, the effect of this transaction is quite visible, that your cash account balance is going to go down. But what are we getting in return from that? That is what needs to be sorted out or carefully thought about. So the cause of this effect is that you acquire the services of your employees for that particular time period of जिसके लिए आपने उसको salaries pay किए. So we agree that this example, the effects and the cause of this transaction, the cause and effect are all connected with each other. The duality principle works that the cause leads to the effect. It's the cause that leads to the effect. So we can see the effect, and based on the effect, we can always detect what the cause should have been. So if you understand the second transaction, give me another feedback window of your green check. Okay. Abu Bakr Khurram, नहीं समझ आई? Azik को आ गई. Good. Right. All right. So I'm going to clear these impacts. Now, another transaction, for example, paid insurance on assets, right? So we paid our insurance on whatever non-current assets that we have acquired over a period of time. उसके लिए हमने इनको इंश्योर करवाया था और उसके इंश्योरेंस प्रीमियम अब हम पे कर रहे हैं. So again, the effect is going to be visible enough for us to conclude कि या तो हमारा कैश अकाउंट या हमारा बैंक अकाउंट डिक्रीज हुआ होगा बिकॉज इंश्योरेंस आपने इन दोनों में से किसी एक तरीके से पे की हुई होगी. So your cash or your bank account balance goes down. That is the effect. But what are we getting in return? What economic benefit are we deriving from this consumption or this spending of cash and bank? And you should agree that we are actually buying security against risks of damages and losses. That is the reason why we paid for this insurance. That is the cause which led to the effect of losing an amount from your cash or bank balance. So do you agree with this? Please give me a green check if you understand the third example, right? Zainab, Rida, Moiz, Daim, Hazik. We understand better? Okay. Now, so इन तीन एग्जाम्पल से कॉज दायम कॉज का मतलब यही होता है ना कि किस वजह से आपका वो इफेक्ट हुआ है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, if you're feeling a pain in your foot, that is the effect of a cause, and the cause would be कि probably आप कहीं गिरे हैं या आपको कोई चोट लगी होगी. So you understand the cause leads to the effect. Understood, Daim? Right? So जब भी एक ट्रांजैक्शन होती है एक्सपेंस के केस में, तो आपको इफेक्ट तो नज़र आ रहा होता है कि आपका कैश या बैंक बैलेंस आपका कम हो रहा है, लेकिन उसके बदले में वो किस वजह से कम हो रहा है, वो वजह आपको आइडेंटिफाई करना है. कॉज इज द रीजनिंग or the reason behind that effect. Why did we lose our bank account or cash account balance? Why did we lose our bank account or cash account balance here? Let me just get it. The effects are here. Why do these effects happen? Because of these reasons. So these are the true reasons why these effects happen. But the problem with the expenses are, generally speaking, the problem with these expenses are that we can only detect the expense every time we lose an amount from the bank account or cash account. So हमें एक्सपेंस के अकर करने का, एक्सपेंस की हैपनिंग का पता ही उस वक्त चलता है जब हमारे कैश या बैंक अकाउंट से कोई अमाउंट डिडक्ट होता है. अगर कैश या बैंक से कोई अमाउंट डिडक्ट नहीं होगा तो हम शायद ये नहीं बता सकेंगे कि हमारा कोई एक्सपेंस इनकर हुआ है या नहीं हुआ. एंड देयर कम्स द फोर्थ एग्जाम्पल. नाउ यू सी दिस एग्जाम्पल. व्हाट इज हैपनिंग टुडे? सब लोग बार बार ड्रॉप क्यों हो रहे हैं? Now take a look at this example, the fourth example here, that you received a gas bill for the month of December, right? आप अपने दिसंबर के मंथ के एंड पे हम assume कर रहे हैं यहाँ पे कि आपका फाइनेंशियल ईयर जो था वो 1st of January को शुरू हुआ और December 31st को ख़त्म हो रहा है, और हमने एंड ऑफ द मंथ ऑफ December हमें एक गैस का बिल रिसीव हुआ. अब वो गैस का बिल जो है वो हमने पे करना है. दिस इज गोइंग टू बी पेड. यूजुअली द यूटिलिटी बिल्स व्हेन यू रिसीव, you're not supposed to pay them right away. You have a certain 2-3 weeks deadline. So now we have received, towards the end of the month of December, we received a gas bill, and that gas bill is payable in the month of January, and the month of January falls in the next financial year. So what is going to happen now? The problem with this particular entry is that there is no effect on your cash or bank. And if we see the other three examples for the expenses, you see, we only detect the existence of an expense every time we lose from cash or bank. But इस केस में कैश और बैंक से तो कोई अमाउंट आप लूज नहीं करेंगे, बिकॉज गैस का बिल तो अभी रिसीव हुआ, अभी पे नहीं हुआ. सो इसका मतलब ये है कि आपका इफेक्ट बहरहाल आपका इफेक्ट रजिस्टर नहीं हुआ. लेकिन डू यू एग्री विद दिस दैट आपने ऑलरेडी फॉर द मंथ ऑफ दिसंबर अपनी यूटिलिटीज का बेनिफिट कंज्यूम कर लिया हुआ है. सो कंजम्पशन ऑफ बेनिफिट हो चुका हुआ है, राइट? लेकिन आपका इफेक्ट जो है आपका कैश या बैंक अभी तक डिक्रीज नहीं हुआ. हाजिक, मैं वही एक्सप्लेन कर रहा हूँ. डू यू अंडरस्टैंड द ट्रांजैक्शन दैट यू रिसीव द गैस बिल for the month of December, which is going to be paid in the month of January, which falls in the next financial period. So by the end of the month of December, जब हम अपनी इनकम स्टेटमेंट्स वगैरह बनाएंगे, अब हमारे पास ये गैस का बिल जो है वो आपकी बुक्स में रिफ्लेक्ट नहीं हो रहा, क्योंकि आपने कोई कैश या चेक्स तो पे ही नहीं किए. So that is why the effect is that there is no effect on the cash or bank balance since the bill remains unpaid at the end of the current financial year. Do you agree with this कि हमने ये अभी तक पे नहीं किया, और अगर ये हमने पे नहीं किया तो आपके कैश या बैंक पे तो कोई इफेक्ट नहीं हो रहा. Do you agree with this, Hazik? Right? However, द यूटिलिटीज़ जो हमने ख़रीदी थी, हमने गवर्नमेंट से यूटिलिटीज़ की बेनिफिट तो कंज्यूम कर लिया हुआ है ऑलरेडी, मंथ हमने गैस को कंज्यूम तो कर लिया हुआ इन द मंथ ऑफ डिसम्बर, राइट? So this type of an example is where we need to understand what the accruals principle is. So the question over here is that when should we recognize the existence of an expense? हमें उस वक्त एक्सपेंस की एग्जिस्टेंस को रिकग्नाइज करना चाहिए जब उसका इफेक्ट विजिबल हो जाए, या उस वक्त करना चाहिए जब हमने उसका कॉज या कंजम्पशन कर लिया इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट की. So what do you think in your chat box? When should we recognize this existence of this expense? कहने का मतलब है कि ये जो रिसीव्ड, ये जो गैस बिल वाला एक्सपेंस है, इसको क्या हम दिसंबर में रिकग्नाइज करें एज एन एक्सपेंस, या शुड वी वेट फॉर द मंथ ऑफ जनवरी जब हम इसको एक्चुअली पे करेंगे और उस वक्त इसको रिकग्नाइज करें एज एन एक्सपेंस? सो व्हाट डू यू थिंक? मोइज कह रहा है कि जनवरी में. बस मुझे आप दिसंबर या जनवरी अपने आंसर में लिख के बताएं कि शुड वी रिकग्नाइज दिस बिल in the month of December, or should we recognize it in the month of January when we actually pay for it? So everyone agrees except for Hazik. Hazik says December, whereas everyone else agrees on January. Shariar says Jan, Hazik says December. Muhammad Haris, मेरे ख्याल में वो जो भी है बच्चा, he's saying January. And Mariha says wait. Daud says January. Erzam says January. Mariha also says January. Okay, Haris. Okay, Abdul Wase. Anna says January. Okay. Now, the correct answer, I will tell you the correct answer to this, but before that, I will introduce the principle of accruals first, and then you will be able to see that why your conclusion of January is wrong. Hazik is the only one who said December, and Hazik is the only one who's correct in this case. Expenses in this case, अब हमारे पास यहाँ पर एक मसला क्रिएट हो गया कि हम एक्सपेंस को उस वक्त रिकग्नाइज करें जब हम कैश या बैंक से पे करें, या उस वक्त रिकग्नाइज करें जब कॉज एग्जिस्ट करना शुरू हो जाए, यानी कि जो रीज़न है जिसकी वजह से आप एक्सपेंस पे करेंगे उस वक्त हो. सो द आंसर इज बेसिकली द कॉज, नॉट द इफेक्ट. आई विल एक्सप्लेन दिस इन द नेक्स्ट स्क्रीन. सो एक्सपेंसेस, पहले हम एक्रूवल्स कॉन्सेप्ट विद रिस्पेक्ट टू एक्सपेंसेस पढ़ेंगे और उसके बाद फिर इसी को हम इनकम्स के ऊपर रिवर्स कर देंगे. एंड ठीक है, सो गुड, थैंक यू हाजिक, वेरी गुड हाजिक. सो एक्रूवल्स कॉन्सेप्ट, ये मैं सारी स्लाइड्स आपके साथ शेयर कर दूंगा. वैसे भी मैं ये क्लास रिकॉर्ड कर रहा हूँ फॉर दोज हु वर एब्सेंट टुडे. लकीली माई लैपटॉप was fixed, so I could record this. So I am recording this class. So accruals concept actually requires expenses to be recognized. Accruals concept. Okay, so what does accruals concept help you? How does it help you to understand this? Accruals concept requires expenses to be recognized at the time of incurrence and not when cash is paid for, right? So basically accruals concept tells you that as soon as the cause start to exist, expense should be recognized. It's not the effect that matters, it's the cause, the true reason why expenses exist. That is what we refer to as incurrence. I am going to define incurrence in a bit, but first of all, we need to understand that accruals concept says incurrence of an expense and payment of cash. They are not to be confused with each other. They are two different events. They are dependent on each other, but they are not to be confused with each other. They are two different events. And effect is going to, यार आज बहुत डिस्टर्बेंस हो रही है क्लास में. आई डोंट नो आप लोगों का इंटरनेट का कोई इशू है या क्या है. So basically, it's not the payment of cash that matters. Accruals concept कह रहा है कि payment of cash is not what matters. What matters is the incurrence of an expense. And now we will define what do we mean by incurrence of an expense. An expense is said to have been incurred as soon as we acknowledge our obligation for goods or services provided to us or consumed by us, regardless of the payment of cash. So इसका मतलब है आप expense कब incur करते हैं? उस वक्त नहीं जब आप कैश पे करते हैं. कैश पेमेंट का कोई ताल्लुक नहीं है सारी चीज से. इनफैक्ट accruals concept says you'd completely disregard when you pay for cash. It is the incurrence of an expense which decides whether an expense happens or not. So it's the expense, and when do we incur an expense? जैसे ही हम अपनी liability या अपनी obligation किसी दूसरे शख्स की तरफ accept कर लेते हैं क्योंकि उसने हमें goods या services provide की थी. So as soon as we acknowledge our obligation for goods or services which were provided to us by some other party, that is when the expense incurs, or that is when the expense starts to exist. The effect of that cause is that you eventually have to pay for that. But the accruals concept says that cash payment does not matter. What matters is as soon as we acknowledge our obligation for the consumption of goods or services, right? जब भी हमें goods or services consume, जैसे ही इसका मतलब ये है कि जब वो गैस का बिल आपके पास आया और आपको पता लग गया कि आपका इतना बिल ड्यू है, that is when expense incurs, right? जब वो पे होगा वो मैटर नहीं करता, वो पे होगा 3 या 4 हफ्ते के बाद जाके in the month of January. So the payment does not matter. What matters is as soon as we have the knowledge that we have consumed the economic benefit of a certain good or or subservice, that is when our expense has already happened. So the December month's bill, which will be eventually paid in the month of January, is going to be recognized in the month of December as an expense. So we understand the 2 points over here on the screen. Abhi there are 2 more points coming up. But first of all, give me the feedback here. Right? Do we understand? Ek baar feedback mujhe de dein, everyone. That do we understand the difference between incurrence of an expense and the payment for an expense? These are 2 different things. Accruals concept says it's the incurrence of an expense that matters. Payment by cash does not matter. Incurrence decides कि एक्सपेंस हुआ है या नहीं है. और इनकरेंस कब होती है? जब आप इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट कंज्यूम करते हैं और आप किसी को ओ करना शुरू हो जाए. दैट इज व्हेन एक्सपेंस इनकर्स. इसका मतलब ये है कि जैसे ही मैंने अपना कंप्यूटर बूट किया आपकी क्लास लेने के लिए और लाइट्स ऑन की, तो उस वक्त मेरा इलेक्ट्रिसिटी का एक्सपेंस इनकर हो गया. हालांकि ये बिल अभी 1 महीने के बाद आएगा और उसके बाद 2-3 हफ्ते के बाद जाके मैं वो बिल पे करूँगा. लेकिन चूंकि मैंने इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट उसी पॉइंट इन टाइम पे कंज्यूम इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट एंजॉय करना शुरू कर दिया. सो इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट की कंजम्पशन जो है वो डिटर्मिन करेगी एक्सपेंस को. उसके लिए जो पेमेंट हो रही है वो एक अलग इवेंट है दैट माइट हैपन इन फ्यूचर. सो जब उसका कोई ताल्लुक एक्सपेंस की रिकग्निशन से नहीं है. एन एक्सपेंस इज गोइंग टू बी रिकग्नाइज्ड एज सून एज यू consume the or acquire the economic benefit, not when you pay cash for it. So we understand this part and the first 2 part. Then give me a green check on the feedback window. Quite a few. Moiz, नहीं समझ आया? आज़िक समझ आ गया या नहीं आया? दाएं. मोहम्मद हारिस जो भी है, राइट? ओके. शरियार, नहीं समझ आ रहा? अच्छा, हमारे पास टाइम बहुत कम है, सो मैं इसको इरेज कर रहा हूँ. ओके. So the third point here is that incurrence of an expense and the eventual settlement through cash are to be analyzed as 2 separate events. ये भी हमने बात की है. It's the incurrence of an expense that matters. And incurrence of an expense means as soon as you consume the economic benefit, your expense has incurred. It will eventually materialize into a cash payment, but the cash payment is not to be considered when you are trying to recognize an expense, because it says in the second point, you say regardless of the cash payment. Regardless of the cash payment. For example, let me give you कि क्यों cash payment क्यों हम disregard कर रहे हैं. Okay, for example, आप सब लोग cell phone services use करते हैं. Some of you have a prepaid connection and some of you have a postpaid connection, right? A prepaid connection is when you pay your bills before you start to use the service. जैसे आप एक स्क्रैच कार्ड खरीदते हैं और स्क्रैच कार्ड को फिर उसका कोड फीड करते हैं, तो आपने अपने फ़ोन के अंदर वो बैलेंस टॉप अप तो कर दिया, लेकिन आपने सर्विस नहीं यूज़ की. वो सर्विस आप अगले 1-3-4 हफ्ते जब भी जितना भी बैलेंस आपने टॉप अप किया उस पर यूज़ करेंगे. सो आपकी कैश पेमेंट कंजम्पशन ऑफ बेनिफिट से पहले हो गई, राइट? सिमिलरली पोस्ट पेड कनेक्शंस में क्या होता है कि आप पहले सेल फोन सर्विसेज यूज करते हैं और आपको बिल उसके अगले महीने में आता है. So इसका मतलब है आप इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट पहले कंज्यूम करेंगे और उसकी पेमेंट अब बाद करेंगे. So the point over here is it's the consumption of economic benefit which is the constant over here. Cash payment is not a constant factor here because sometimes cash payment will take place before the consumption of the economic benefit, just like the prepaid connection wali example. Or and some other times, if you have a postpaid connection, then you will consume the service first and then you will make a payment afterwards, maybe in the next month. So since the cash payment cannot have a constant common ground, sometimes it happens before the incurrence of an expense, sometimes it happens after the incurrence of an expense. So that is why accruals concept says कि cash payment की basis के ऊपर आप expense को recognize नहीं कर सकते क्योंकि उसकी कोई constant basis है ही नहीं. तो constant basis हम यहाँ से क्या derive करते हैं कि अच्छा सर्विस की कंजम्पशन या गुड्स की कंजम्पशन वहां से आपको पता लगेगा कि आपका एक्सपेंस हो गया या नहीं हुआ. सो कंजम्पशन ऑफ इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट इज ऑलवेज गोइंग टू डिटरमिन योर एक्सपेंस. द पेमेंट ऑफ कैश इज सिंपली एन इफेक्ट ऑफ अ कॉज. इट्स द कॉज दैट मैटर्स, नॉट द इफेक्ट. द इफेक्ट ऑन कैश और बैंक कैन हैपन बिफोर द कंजम्पशन ऑफ the service or economic benefit, or it may happen after the consumption of economic benefit. So you disregard the timing of cash flows. You only focus on the timings of your consumption of that particular service. So if we understand the third point, please give me a green check. That incurrence of an expense and payment for that particular incurrence are two different things happening in two different periods of time usually. These should be analyzed separately and these should not be confused as one transaction. These are two different events. So we understand this part. Jawad, nahi samajh aa raha? Angelina, whoever that is. Right, Mohammad Haris, whatever yaar. आप लोग अपने नाम अगली बार बेटे अपने नाम से आना है. Okay. Now comes the last part, the nutshell. Finally, जो भी हम सारा कुछ discuss कर रहे हैं. It's the act of acquiring and consuming the economic benefit of goods and services. That is what determines the incurrence of an expense and not the eventual payment of cash or bank, right? So last point is just simply the nutshell of what we have discussed so far. It's the act of acquiring the benefit or act of consuming that benefit which determines that whether you have incurred an expense or not. Eventual payment of cash does not matter. Okay, we understand the last point. Give me a green check. Anas Daim. Okay, so I'm moving on to the next part. If you have to ask any question, then please write in the chat box, or then I'll move on the next slide. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next one. Okay, moving on. So basically, now we can sort of classify our expenses into basically two basic types: incurrence versus payment ki basis pe. Incurrence is one event, payment for that is a separate event. So based on this fact, we can identify our expenses either as accrued expenses or prepaid expenses. So accrued expenses का मतलब क्या है? Accrued expenses का मतलब है economic benefit आपने acquire कर लिया है या consume कर लिया हुआ है. However, the cash is yet to be paid. So this is like postpaid, your cell phone bill, your post payment is a perfect example for this. और जैसे अभी हमने वो जो गैस बिल की एग्जांपल देखी थी पिछली स्लाइड्स में से, वो इसकी एग्जांपल है कि आपने इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट तो कंज्यूम कर लिया हुआ है लेकिन अभी आपने उसके लिए पेमेंट नहीं की, एंड दैट इज गोइंग टू हैपन इन फ्यूचर, राइट? Similarly, if you have a postpaid connection on your cell phone, that means you will use the cellular services in the month of October, and the month of October's bill will come in the month of November. That means the consumption of benefit happens already in the month of October. However, cash was not paid in the month of October. So we understand the meaning of accrued expenses. Give me your feedback quickly. जी शरियार, आपने कुछ पूछना है बेटे? You raised your hand. Shariar, green check or raise your hand. Do you need to ask a question here? Acha, so green check then, na beta. Raise hand is that when you need to ask a question. Okay. Now, prepaid expense means, as the name suggests, prepaid. आपके पास, most of you have actually a prepaid cellular connection. So basically, prepaid connection or prepaid an expense means that you pay cash in advance. However, the economic benefit is yet to be acquired, right? So prepaid connection में आप scratch card पहले खरीद लेते हैं and you pay cash in advance because as soon as you buy that scratch card, you end up paying cash. However, the economic benefit of that particular payment is going to be enjoyed in the following period. For example, आपके पास आपने जो अक्टूबर के मंथ में के पहले शुरू होने से पहले जो आपने स्क्रैच कार्ड शुरू किया था, आप उसका बेनिफिट अभी भी अक्टूबर के मंथ में कंज्यूम कर रहे हैं and by the end of the month of October probably you are continuing to consume that benefit. So the question over here is, do you agree that it's this factor here? This is what determines the existence of an expense, the consumption of the benefit, right? So do you agree with this, that this accrued expense qualifies to be an expense, whereas a prepaid expense does not qualify to be an expense because consumption of benefit determine करती है कि आपका expense हुआ है या नहीं हुआ. तो accrued expense के केस में आपने चूंकि benefit already acquire कर लिया और consume कर लिया तो आपका expense हो गया है. That is why we have a tick over here. लेकिन प्रीपेड एक्सपेंस के केस में चूंकि अभी आपने इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट कंज्यूम नहीं किया हुआ, फ्यूचर में करने वाले हैं, इसलिए ये आपका करंट पीरियड का एक्सपेंस नहीं है एंड दैट इज व्हाई आई प्लेस्ड अ क्रॉस ओवर देयर. सो इफ यू एग्री विद द स्टेटस ऑफ दीज टू, दैट accrued expense qualifies to be your expense and a prepaid expense does not qualify to be expense based on simply the fact that the consumption of benefit has either taken place or it has not taken place yet. Based on just this fact, we identify the nature of expenses, whether expense happens or expense has not happened. And you see that we have completely disregarded these factors over here because cash pay हुआ है या cash pay नहीं हुआ, उसका कोई ताल्लुक आपके expense की recognition से नहीं है. So the only way we recognize the existence of an expense is whether we have consumed the economic benefit or not. So in the case of accrued expenses, since the benefit has been consumed, so that qualifies to be your expense. And in the case of prepaid expense, since the benefit is yet to be consumed, so that does not qualify to be your expense. So I put a cross over here. So if you agree with the check and the cross on the screen, then give me your feedback on the participant windows, please, quickly. Yes, Maliha. Good. Okay. All good. So now we will move on to our next part. So अब हम finally expenses के बारे में हमने जो कुछ भी सीखा है, हम उसको आप देखिए कि हमारी financial statements पे उसका क्या effect होगा. We are familiar with our two financial statements, the income statement over here and the balance sheet, and let's see how these expenses, if they are accrued or prepaid, how are they going to affect our balance sheet? What impact will they have on our financial statements? So let's take one type at a time, the accrued expense. Now, so what we have learned about accrued expenses is explanation column ke andar you can see that we have already consumed the economic benefit, and if the economic benefit has been consumed, so that means we will recognize it as an expense, even though cash has not been paid. Accrued expense का मतलब है expense which has not been paid yet. something which is yet to be settled, an expense which is yet to be settled in cash. So हमने कैश सेटलमेंट को बेसिस पे एक्सपेंस को रिकग्नाइज नहीं करना होता, हमने कंजम्पशन ऑफ बेनिफिट की बेसिस पे करना होता है. सो चूंकि बेनिफिट आप कंज्यूम कर चुके हुए, इसका मतलब है ये आपका एक्सपेंस इनकर हो गया हुआ है, और अगर ये आपका एक्सपेंस इनकर हो गया हुआ है, then it should be included in the expenses section when you are making the income statement. Do you agree with what you see on the slide so far? That even if an accrued expense has not been paid in cash yet, even if your cash is still unaffected, it would still be included as an expense in your income statement because it qualifies to be one based on the fact that you have already consumed the economic benefit. If you agree with this, then give me a green check on the participants window. Jaldi se. शरियार नूर अली, नो सर. शरियार क्या चीज़ है? अभी तो आपका ग्रीन चेक आया हुआ. ओके, मस्ट बी सम पुराना फीडबैक होगा कोई. ठीक है. ओके. Excellent. So now we come to the second part, the balance sheet treatment. We know that no transaction in accounting records can have just one effect. It has to have two effects. The duality principle must prevail at all times. So एक effect तो आपको यहाँ पे नज़र आ गया कि ये आपका expense है और आपके expenses में इसको include होना चाहिए क्योंकि आपने economic benefit consume कर लिया हुआ है. जब हम बैलेंस शीट में आते हैं तो बैलेंस शीट के अंदर आपका एनालिसिस ये नहीं होता कि क्या चीज़ इनकम है या क्या चीज़ एक्सपेंस है. बैलेंस शीट इज अ स्टेटमेंट which analyzes items either as assets or liabilities. So now we are going to see if this accrued expense, does it qualify to be an asset or a liability, because that is how we are going to show it in our balance sheet. So what do you think the other effect of this expense should be? If it qualifies to be an expense, we include it in the income statement. But if we are to show it in the balance sheet, we have to ask ourselves, okay, does it make an asset or a liability for us? So what do you say? Answer in your chat box, everyone. What do you think? Is this going to be a liability for us or an asset for us? Because everything has to have two sides of the story. So in this case, one side of the story tells us that it is an expense. What is the other side of the story? Everyone agree on it's a liability. Excellent, everyone. Everyone, very good. It is a liability. Why is it a liability? Because of this fact. Since the cash is not paid, आपने बेनिफिट कंज्यूम कर लिया है, वो आपका एक्सपेंस तो हो गया, लेकिन चूंकि कैश पे नहीं हुआ अभी तक, इसका मतलब है अब आप किसी को ओ करते. एंड दैट इज व्हाई इन द बैलेंस शीट we are going to include this accrued expense also as a liability, current liability section में. Everyone, very good. And वो उसकी reason क्या है? Because we owe someone. This amount is yet to be paid, Haris said correctly, right? So we owe someone. That is why we should also include it as a current liability. So we understand the effect of accrued expense on our income statement and on our balance sheet. We will include it in our expenses. We will add it to our expenses section. And not just that, we will also include it in the current liability section of the balance sheet because of the fact that we owe someone now. So give me a green check if you completely understand the first half of this table. वासिया, जवाद, दाऊद शफाकत, नहीं समझ आया? दाऊद शफाकत, good. Okay, now we move on to the second type of the expenses, the second possibility related to our expense. When an expense is prepaid, that means that cash is paid in advance. So cash is already paid, but the benefit is yet to be consumed. And if the benefit is yet to be consumed, that means, according to the principle of accruals, the expense has not been incurred yet. क्योंकि बेनिफिट आपने अभी कंज्यूम नहीं किया तो आपका एक्सपेंस नहीं हुआ. कैश पेमेंट डज नॉट मैटर. It's the consumption of benefit that matters. right? So do you understand the explanation of this? And based on that, give me your answer in the income statement wala column. What do you think? Should it be included in our expenses section of the income statement, or should it be excluded from the income statement analysis? A prepaid expense, should we treat it as an expense in the income statement, or should we not treat it as an expense in the, it should be excluded, subtracted, excluded. Very good. Very good, everyone. Everyone is excluded as economic benefit is not consumed. Daud Shafaqat, excellent. Right? So excellent. So it should be excluded from the expenses. और exclude करने का मतलब ये है, किसी ने subtracted भी लिखा था. So exclude करने का मतलब यही है कि आप अपने expenses की list में से इसको subtract कर देंगे, क्योंकि आपके वो accounts में appear तो हो रहा होगा cash payment की वजह से, लेकिन वो आपके expense पे qualify नहीं करता. So that is why you will exclude it from your expenses and you will subtract it from your expenses based on the fact that accruals concept says that only consumption of benefit matters. So, and since the consumption of benefit has not taken place yet, so it should not be a part of our expenses. So that is what we will do in the income statement. अगर हमारे पास कोई prepaid expense आएगा तो हम अपने income statement के expenses में से उसको exclude कर देंगे या subtract कर देंगे. What will happen in the balance sheet and why would that effect take place? Answer in the chat box. What do you think? How should we treat it in the balance sheet, and why should we treat it the way you have suggested? साथ reason भी लिखनी है जवाब. Reason भी लिखनी है. सिर्फ current asset is not enough. We understand current assets, yes, but why do we show it as a current asset? Included in the asset. Maliha says current asset as we have to consume the benefit. Very good, Maliha, but which is yet to be used. Basically, the reason is that if you make a payment in advance to someone, do you agree with this now that that someone else owes you that service? अगर आपने रेंट एडवांस में पे कर दिया है तो अब आपका लैंडलॉर्ड आपको ओ करता है अकोमोडेशन सर्विसेज. इट्स अ रिसीवेबल. मोहम्मद हारिस, वेरी गुड. हाजिक, एज एन एसेट, क्योंकि वो हम ऑलरेडी पे कर चुके हैं और अब हमें कोई शख्स ओ करता है. So when we owe someone, that's a liability. But when someone else owes us, that becomes a receivable or an asset. So excellent, everyone. It will be included in the current asset section. Why do we include it in the current asset section? Because someone owes us now, and that is the true reason why we. So जैसे हम trade receivables को अपने current assets में show करते हैं क्योंकि वो लोग हमें owe करते हैं, इस तरह जिसको भी हमने अपने expense के लिए advance में payment की होगी, that person is going to owe us services, and that is what makes it similar to the trade receivables. Excellent, very good, Rabia, very good. So now final green check if you understand everything on the screen. Very good. Very good. Excellent. Very good. Okay. So moving on. Now we will dissect incomes. Expenses को हमने देख लिया. अब हम देखेंगे कि incomes पे accruals principle की यही provisions किस तरह apply करते हैं. Remember, incomes and expenses are mirror images of each other. Right, Hazik? I know. मेरी भी क्लास है अगले 10 मिनट के अंदर. अभी 10 मिनट पढ़े हाजिक. Stay in there. Right? So incomes के केस में भी हम इसी तरह से जैसे हमने expenses को define किया कि हम कैसे expense को recognize करेंगे, इसी तरह से अब हम incomes को identify करते हैं कि how does accruals principle, how does it ask us to analyze income. So an income is going to be recognized when earned and not when cash is received. Just like a similar statement we saw in the previous slides. Expense के बारे में लिखा हुआ था कि expense is recognized when incurred and not when cash is paid. So income के केस के अंदर हम क्या करेंगे कि income accruals principle के मुताबिक income आप किस वक्त recognize करते हैं? जब आप earn करते हैं. जब आप income earn करते हैं उस वक्त आप income की existence को recognize करेंगे. उस वक्त नहीं जब आपको actually cash मिलेगा उसके बदले में. So basically that means that earning and income now needs to be defined, because we probably confused earning and income and receiving cash as the same thing. They're not the same thing. Just like incurring an expense and paying cash for that expense, we confused earlier on as if they were the same thing, and now we know accruals principle tells us They are not the same thing. They are two different things. So earning an income is one thing, and receiving cash for that is another event. दोनों आपस में connected तो होते हैं, लेकिन दोनों अलग अलग, they are two separate events. So how do we define, what do we mean by earning an income? An income is earned as soon as the other party acknowledges its obligation towards us for goods or services which were delivered by us. जिस तरह एक्सपेंस के केस में आपका एक्सपेंस कब इनकर होता है? जैसे ही आपने इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट कंज्यूम कर लिया, आपका एक्सपेंस इनकर हो गया, उस वक्त नहीं जब आपने कैश पे किया. इसी तरह आप इनकम कब अर्न करेंगे? जैसे ही आपने इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट डिलीवर कर दिया, आपने इनकम अर्न कर ली, उस वक्त नहीं जब आपको उसके बदले में कैश मिलेगा. सो इट्स एग्जैक्टली द सेम थिंग. वी आर जस्ट लुकिंग एट इट इन अ मिरर इमेज, राइट? So we agree with the first 2 points. We understand the difference between earning an income and receiving cash. They are two different events, just like incurring an expense and paying cash. Give me your feedback quickly. Anas, Abu Bakr? Anas, okay. Time बहुत कम है, इसलिए मैं wait नहीं कर सकता. So now comes the third point, just like the previous slide. Earning an income and receiving a compensation in cash are to be analyzed as two separate events, and now we already know about that. Earning an income is the cause and the effect of that cause is that you will receive cash. So cause will eventually materialize into an effect. So earning an income is one thing, and receiving cash for what you earned is another thing. And finally, just like the nutshell in the previous slides, it is the act of delivering economic benefit which earns us an income and not the eventual cash inflow. Just like the expense, it's the act of delivering the benefit which earns you the income, and not what you receive as a reaction to that action. So it's the action that matters. Reaction is that you will receive cash, right? It's like postpaid. No, Haris, it's not like postpaid. It's like income. You receive what you earn. So earning an income determines the income. What you receive is simply not to be considered. It is going to be disregarded. Cash या check की amount जो आप receive कर रहे हैं, उसको आप disregard कर देंगे. So based on exactly the same thing, let's see earning an income. अर्निंग और रिसीविंग में क्या फ़र्क है, हम उसकी बेसिस के ऊपर अपनी इनकम्स को दो तरह की इनकम्स में क्लासिफाई करेंगे, जैसे एग्जैक्टली हमने एक्सपेंसेस को दो तरह के एक्सपेंसेस में क्लासिफाई किया था. एक्रूड इनकम्स का मतलब है इनकम्स येट टू बी सेटल्ड, एंड प्रीपेड इनकम्स का मतलब है इनकम आपको एडवांस में रिसीव हो गई हुई है. सो एक्रूड इनकम्स का मतलब है इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट आप डिलीवर कर चुके हुए हैं, लेकिन अभी आपको कैश मिलना बाकी है. यू आर येट टू रिसीव द कॉम्पनसेशन, राइट? आपने बेनिफिट डिलीवर कर दिया हुआ है. एंड प्रीपेड इनकम का मतलब है कि आपने कैश एडवांस में रिसीव कर लिया हुआ है, लेकिन अभी इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट डिलीवर नहीं किया. सो आप यहीं से आप देख सकते हैं कि चूंकि आपने इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट डिलीवर नहीं किया हुआ, तो ये आपकी इनकम नहीं है. दिस इज नॉट एन इनकम. दिस इज नॉट एन इनकम, एंड दिस क्वालिफाइज टू बी योर इनकम. Since the economic benefit is done, this is an income. Right? So the delivering of economic benefit determines whether income has been earned or not. So accrued income is your income, but prepaid income is not your income since the economic benefit has not been delivered. So do you agree with this? Give me a green check. अबू बकर, अगर आपकी क्लास शुरू होगी तो आप चले जाना. मैं रिकॉर्ड कर रहा हूँ सेशन एनीवे, तो बाकी का मिसिंग हिस्सा तो आप बाद में देख लेना, ठीक है? क्योंकि अभी मुझे 5 मिनट और लगेंगे. Right? Okay, excellent. And before we move on to the next slide, do you agree with this, that this accrued income is going to be your asset as well? Why is it going to be your asset? हाँ, हाजिक आप चले जाएं. हाजिक आप चले जाएं, मैं रिकॉर्ड कर रहा हूँ लेसन, और फिर आप बाद में देख लेना. Right? Okay. So do you agree with this, that the accrued income is also your asset, because now someone owes you. Why does someone owe you? Because the cash is still to be recovered. So someone who you have delivered the economic benefit, Allah Hafiz Hassan, right? Someone owes us money. Excellent, Rabia. Right? Someone owes us money, and that is why accrued income also qualify to be an asset or a receivable to us. And do you agree with this that a prepaid income is going to be a liability for us? Why is it going to be a liability for us? Because हमने कैश एडवांस में रिसीव कर लिया हुआ है और अब हम इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट ओ करते हैं किसी को. दिस इज येट टू बी डिलीवर्ड मीन्स इट इज owed to someone, and that is why a prepaid income becomes a liability. So we agree with this annotation on the screen. Give me a green check. Okay, good. Zainab, Jawad. Okay, good. Zainab, आपको आवाज आ रही है बेटे? चलो मेरे ख्याल उसको आवाज नहीं आ रही, टाइम बहुत कम रह गया. So now we are going to move on to our final slide. How is it going to have an effect on our income statement and on our balance sheet? So I'm going to quickly go through these effects, and I'm sure you will agree with this. So accrued income की explanation क्या है? Explanation ये है कि accrued income का मतलब है economic benefit आप deliver कर चुके हुए हैं. इसका मतलब है income आप earn कर चुके हुए हैं, क्योंकि benefit deliver करने से आप income earn करते हैं, cash receive करने से नहीं. Cash is yet to be received. That means someone owes you this cash, and that is why income statement it should be included as an income. Why should it be included as an income? Because income has been earned. What determines earning an income? The delivering of economic benefit. So economic benefit since delivered, that means income has been earned. That means it should be included as an income in the income statement. And when there is an income in the income statement, we add it to the gross profit. Gross profit के बाद expenses minus करते हैं ना, तो अगर कोई आपके पास other incomes होती हैं तो वहाँ पे आप add कर देंगे. So इस तरह की कोई अगर income exist करती हुई तो आप अपने gross profit में add कर देंगे. And the duality principle demands that it must have another effect somewhere, and the other effect we detect should be in the balance sheet. Why should it be in the balance sheet? Because somebody owes us, and that somebody becomes sort of a trade receivable for us, and that is what we include under the current asset section. So if you understand the impact on income statement and balance sheet about the accrued income, please give me a green check. Anas, Rida. Balance sheet. Anas, क्या question क्या है यहाँ पे? Balance sheet question mark means what is going to happen in the balance sheet? It will be included in the current assets, as it says on the screen here. It will be included in the current asset section. Why do we include it in the current asset section? Because someone owes us our money. That's why. Yes or no, Anas? Okay, good. Now, moving on to prepaid expenses. Oh, prepaid incomes, sorry. So prepaid income, first of all, we will describe what do we understand by prepaid income. Prepaid income means that you have received cash in advance. Prepaid means that cash in advance has been collected. However, the economic benefit is yet to be delivered. And if economic benefit is yet to be delivered, that means it was not delivered. That means the income has not been earned. That is what a prepaid income means. So if the income has not been earned, so you would agree that it should be excluded or subtracted from our incomes in the income statement because we did not earn that income. Excellent, Moise. We will exclude it from our income section in the income statement, and we should include it in the current liability section of the balance sheet. Why? Because now we owe someone these services or economic benefit which are yet to be delivered. Right, added as a liability because you owe this benefit to someone else, and that is why we are going to show it in the current liability section. So now our class is complete. If you agree with everything written on the screen right now, you see the screen right now. If everything is fine, will it have a negative effect on the income section? Yes, of course, Moise, it will have a negative effect. एंड या नेगेटिव इफेक्ट का मतलब ये कि आप अपनी इनकम में से उसको सब्ट्रैक्ट करेंगे. एज यू सी ओवर हियर इट सेज टू बी एक्सक्लूडेड और टू बी सब्ट्रैक्टेड. इट मींस द सेम थिंग. एक्सक्लूडिंग समथिंग मींस existing value में से आप उसको सब्ट्रैक्ट कर देंगे, right? So if you understand everything, then give me your final feedback. Right? Okay, good. And okay, now you leave. If you have to ask anything, then stay back. Otherwise, you can leave now. जी अबू बकर नहीं, अनस नहीं, अच्छा कोई नहीं. Anyway.
Allah Hafiz, sir.
Okay, Anas, thank you. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.